At my grandson's baby shower, my daughter-in-law held up the blanket I had spent 4 months knitting, wrinkled her nose and dropped it straight into the trash can. "We only use designer things here," she said, smiling for the camera her friend was holding. The whole room did that awful nervous half-laugh. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I walked over, lifted my blanket out of the bin, folded it into my bag, and drove home without a single word. That night my son called me, and his voice was already in pieces before he managed to get a sentence out. "Mom," he said, "please, what was folded inside that blanket?" I sat down at my kitchen table with the blanket in my lap, my husband's last gift still sewn safe in its lining, and I asked him very gently, "Why do you want to know, Ethan?" "Because of what your daughter-in-law just threw in the garbage in front of 20 people for the crime of being homemade. And because of what happened when this whole family finally found out what it was." Welcome back to Alpha Mom Stories, where the gift they call cheap is so often the only thing in the room that money could never buy. Stay with me all the way to the end of this one. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe because what was hidden in that lining is going to matter more than you can imagine right now. My name is Olivia Mercer. I am 68 years old, and for 40 years I ran a little tailoring and fabric shop on the corner of Bell Street, where I hemmed wedding gowns and let out funeral suits and taught half the women in this town how to thread a needle without cursing at it. I know fabric the way some people know music. I can run my fingers along a seam and tell you what a garment cost. And I can tell you what it is truly worth by something else entirely, something that has nothing whatsoever to do with the price tag hanging off the sleeve. My hands are not what they used to be. The arthritis came for them about 5 years ago, the way it always does, slowly and then all at once. There are mornings when my fingers will not close around a needle until I have run them under hot water and coaxed them open like stubborn children who don't want to go to school. I don't tell you that for your pity. I tell you so you understand exactly what 4 months of knitting cost a woman with hands like mine, and why I did it anyway, every painful row of it. People look at a woman like me, and they see a sweet old lady with a basket of yarn. Harmless. A little behind the times. My daughter-in-law looked at me and saw precisely that, and I let her, because I learned a very long time ago that being underestimated is its own quiet kind of armor. But I spent 40 years watching people walk into my shop in $800 coats with the buttons sewn on by a machine that didn't care, and walk back out happier in a 40-year-old wool one I had mended by hand at my own table. I know what lasts. I know what doesn't. And I knew, the night my son called me with his voice breaking apart on the line, that my daughter-in-law had just learned the difference between those two things the hardest way a person can learn it. Let me start where this story really begins. Let me start with Antonio. My husband Antonio passed away 10 months before that baby shower. 43 years of marriage, and then a Tuesday afternoon in a hospital room, and then a house that was suddenly far, far too quiet for one person. Antonio was not a flashy man. He drove the same truck for 19 years and only let me retire it when the floor of it nearly rusted through. He wore the same brown work coat until I finally hid it from him out of mercy. He was the kind of man who noticed when the young clerk at the hardware store looked tired and slipped him an extra 5 for coffee, and never said a word about it again. But Antonio was a saver. Not a hoarder of money, you understand, but a planter of it. He thought in decades the way other men think in weekends. While the other husbands on our street bought boats they used twice a summer, Antonio bought small, boring, patient things and let time do the heavy lifting. Time is the only thing that pays interest on patience, Liv, he used to tell me on the porch. And what I did not fully understand until very near the end was how long that man had been quietly planning for a person who did not even exist yet. Antonio wanted to be a grandfather more than he had ever wanted anything in his life. We had waited a long time for it. Ethan, our only child, married late, and the baby took its time in coming. Antonio used to talk about it out on that porch in the evenings, the fishing he would teach, the terrible jokes he would inflict, the kind of glorious trouble he intended to be. He didn't make it. The baby was still just a whisper of good news. A due date circled on the kitchen calendar, when Antonio's heart finally laid down its tools and rested. But here is the thing about a man who thinks in decades. He had been getting ready to be a grandfather for almost 30 years before there was ever a grandchild to be ready for. And he had hidden the proof of it all that long time, exactly where he knew I would find it when the moment came. About a week before Antonio died, when we both knew the road was ending, He asked me to bring him the old cigar box from the top shelf of his closet. I had seen that box up there for 30 years and never once opened it. I assumed it held old receipts or his father's war medals, or the kind of harmless nothing a man keeps because throwing it away would feel like a small death. I was wrong about what was in it, and I have never in my life been so glad to be wrong. It was full of savings bonds. Stacks of them, rubber-banded by year, going all the way back to before Ethan was even grown. United States savings bonds bought a little at a time. $50 here. $100 there. Every birthday, every Christmas bonus, every good month for almost 30 years. And on the front of the envelope, in Antonio's blocky pencil handwriting, it said, "For our first grandbaby." I started the year Ethan turned 10, Antonio told me. His voice thin as paper but his eyes clear as a winter morning. Figured someday there'd be a little one. Wanted to hand them a head start nobody could ever take away from them. He squeezed my hand with what strength he had left. They've all come due now, Liv. 30 years of them. They're worth real money. I asked him how much. He told me, "I am not going to make you wait for that number the way this family had to." It was just under $47,000. $47,000 saved one small bond at a time by a man in a rusted-out truck, for a child he already knew he might never live to meet. And then Antonio told me the part that has mattered more to me than the money ever could, the part one think about every single morning when I run my hands under that hot water. "Don't just hand them an envelope, Liv," he said. "Money in an envelope, they'll spend it on a stroller and forget where it ever came from." He smiled, that same crooked smile I married. "Put it somewhere they'll have to keep. Sew it into something. Make her open the blanket. Make them find it. Make it last. Make her open the blanket." That was very nearly the last clear instruction my husband ever gave me on this earth, and I intended to honor it perfectly. Hold on to those words because they become the cruelest irony of everything that follows, and I promise you it stings. So I knitted a blanket. I started the month after we buried him, partly for the baby and partly, I will be honest with you, to give my shaking hands something to do besides shake. Cream-colored wool, soft as a cloud, with a border of tiny blue sailboats running all the way around it, because Antonio loved the water, because he had promised that unborn baby fishing trips he was never going to get to take. And down in one corner, small enough that you would have to know to look for it, I knitted his initials, AM, so that a piece of him would be in the room for every nap, every fever, every bad dream, for as long as that blanket survived. Took me 4 months. My hands made me pay in full for every row. There were nights I sat there and wept over it, and not from the arthritis, from the missing. But I finished it, and it was, I will say this without an ounce of false modesty, the single most beautiful thing these hands have ever made. And then I did the real work. The work no one could see. On the underside, I sewed a flat inner pocket, the very same kind I used to hide in coat linings for travelers who didn't trust their money to a suitcase. Into that hidden pocket I folded Antonio's bonds, all 30 years of his patience, and one thing more. A letter. Antonio had dictated it to me from his hospital bed, in his own halting words, and made me write it down and read it back to him twice to be sure I had it right. It was a letter to the grandchild he would never meet, about who he was and where they came from and everything he hoped for them. Sealed in an envelope that read, "To be opened on your 18th birthday. Love, Grandpa Antonio." I folded the bonds and that letter into the lining, and I stitched the pocket shut, neat and invisible. $47,000 and a dying man's last words, sewn with love into a thing a young woman was about to call cheap. I wrapped it in plain cream paper. I tied it with a bit of blue ribbon the color of those sailboats, and I drove to my grandson's baby shower with the most precious package in the world riding on the seat beside me where Antonio used to sit. I even talked to him a little on the way I still do. "Big day, Antonio," I said. "We're giving them your bonds today. Can you believe it? We're going to be grandparents after all." I had absolutely no idea I was driving toward a room that would throw my husband into a garbage can and call it a vibe. Now, before I take you into that room, I have to tell you about the people in it because I refuse to let them be cartoons. The truth is sadder than that and more useful. Let me tell you about Natasha first. My daughter-in-law, Natasha Malkova, grew up the only child of a woman named Lola Chantel, who measures the entire world in labels. I met Lola exactly twice before the wedding, And on both occasions she found a way to mention what her handbag had cost within the first 5 minutes. Natasha was raised from the cradle to believe that the worth of a thing, a coat, a car, a house, a person, is printed on a little tag, and that the very worst fate that can befall a woman is to be seen, even for a moment, as common. So Natasha curates everything. Her apartment looks like a furniture catalog. Her clothes are deliberate, chosen for the photograph before they're chosen for the day. And ever since the pregnancy, that baby had quietly become the ultimate accessory. A designer nursery. A registry full of brand names I had never heard of and could not pronounce. A whole aesthetic of a perfect little life, documented and posted and admired by strangers. I tried to like her. I genuinely did. She wasn't cruel to me in the early days, not exactly. She simply looked at me the way she looked at a thrift store, with a polite, faint distaste, as though she might catch something just from standing too close. And I will tell you what I came to believe, sitting alone in my kitchen afterward. Underneath all those labels, Natasha is frightened. Frightened in exactly the way her mother trained her to be. Frightened that if the wrong person ever looks too closely, they will see something cheap. And the cruel joke of people built that way is that they cannot recognize the genuinely precious when it is sitting right in their hands, because it doesn't come with a logo to tell them it's allowed to matter. And now I have to tell you about my son, because the part of this story that still aches in my chest is not Natasha. It is Ethan. Ethan is a good man who has spent his entire life avoiding conflict the way some people avoid heights. He is gentle, he is funny, and he loved his father fiercely. And somewhere in the falling in love with Natasha, my son started going quiet, agreeing, smoothing things over, keeping the peace at any price. When Lola Chantel redecorated their whole life in labels, Ethan just went along with it because going along was easier, and my son has nearly always chosen easier. After Antonio died, Ethan came apart the way quiet men do, privately, where it wouldn't inconvenience anybody. He'd call me late at night just to talk about his dad. He kept Antonio's old fishing hat on a hook by his front door. He, of all the people on this earth, knew exactly who his father was. Which is why what happened at that shower did not break Natasha. Natasha, as you will see, deflects. Broke Ethan. Because Ethan was sitting right there in that room. Ethan watched his wife call his dead father's gift homemade, and drop it in the trash. And Ethan, keeping the peace, choosing easier, said nothing at all. Even laughed a little. The nervous laugh. He didn't know what was inside it. I want to be fair to him about that. But he knew his grieving mother had made it with her ruined hands, and he let it go into that bin to avoid a scene. That is the thing my son is going to carry for the rest of his life. Not Natasha's cruelty. His own silence. Remember that, because the voice that breaks on my phone later tonight belongs to a man who has just learned what his quiet truly cost. Now, let me take you into the room. The invitation had come on heavy cardstock with gold edges. There was a dress code for a baby shower, if you can imagine such a thing, but I didn't mind. I was, God help me, excited. I had the most important gift in the entire world sitting wrapped on my passenger seat, and I had practiced in my head exactly how the moment would go. Natasha would open it, find a soft cream blanket, and then I would lean in and say gently, "There's something special inside it, sweetheart. From Antonio. Feel along the bottom seam." And she would find the pocket, and the bonds, and the letter, and the whole room would understand at once that the quiet man who couldn't be there had been planning for this baby for 30 patient years. "Make her open the blanket," Antonio had said. I was going to make sure she opened that blanket. Lola Chantel's house was done up like a boutique hotel. White peonies on every surface. A balloon arch in 3 shades of gray. A table of tiny catered things that cost more than they fed. And there, standing by the gift table with her phone already out and recording, was Natasha's friend, a young woman everyone simply called Johnsina, a nickname from some joke I never did get to the bottom of. She was there to capture content for Natasha's page. I didn't think a single thing about it at the time. I would think a great deal about it later. I found a chair near the edge, the one where the old aunt is meant to sit, and I was not unhappy there because I had my secret, and a good secret keeps you warm. Every time one of those glossy young women glanced at my plain cream box with that little flicker of pity, I just thought about the pocket sewn into the lining, and I smiled to myself. I want you to understand that, because of everything that happened that day, it is the part one grieve the most. I walked into that room happy. I walked in carrying my dead husband's love for a baby he would never hold, ready to give it all away with both hands and glad to do it. I had no armor on at all. Why on earth would I? You don't wear armor to a baby shower. You bring a blanket and a full heart, and you assume the people there will at the very least be kind. And here is where I need to ask you something because you have been with me this far and I genuinely want to know. If you had been sitting in that chair, if it were your handmade gift on that table and your dead husband's love stitched inside it, would you have stood up and announced what was in it the second she touched it? Or would you have kept the secret, the way a dying man asked you to, and trusted the room to be decent? Tell me honestly in the comments. Because I made my choice that afternoon, and I have questioned it 10,000 times since. Antonio's younger sister was there too, Jennifer Nicole Lee, 65 years old, sharp and warm, the one other person in that whole room besides me who had truly loved my husband. She squeezed into the seat beside mine and nodded at my box. Is that the famous blanket? Antonio told me what you were sewing into it, the old softie. She winked at me. That baby is one lucky little fish. Should you tell her before she opens it? Jennifer whispered. About the bonds. So she's careful with it. I shook my head, smiling. Antonio's orders. Make her open the blanket and find it herself. I'll point her to the seam after. Jennifer chuckled. He always did love a bit of theater, my brother. And I have thought about that little exchange more times than I can count. If I had only listened to her. If I had stood up and announced before Natasha's fingers ever touched the wool that there was $47,000 in Antonio's last letter sewn inside, none of what followed would have happened. Natasha would have handled it like the Hope Diamond. There would have been no story to tell you. But I didn't because I was honoring a dying man's wish, and because in honest truth it never once occurred to me in 1,000 years that any human being would simply throw a handmade blanket into the garbage. The gifts dwindled down. The designer pile grew into a little mountain beside Natasha's white chair. And then there were only 2 presents left on that table. A gift card in an envelope, and my plain cream box with its blue ribbon. Lola Chantel picked up my box and read the little tag. From Grandma Olivia, she announced, with the gentle condescension you'd use for a child's macaroni art. A few people went. Ah! Johnsina's phone came up and pointed straight at us. Natasha took the box. She gave the plain wrapping a quick, assessing look, and the corner of her mouth did something I did not like one bit. Let's see what Grandma made, she said, and she pulled the paper away. And for one single moment I let myself hope. The cream paper fell away and there it was. For months of my hands. The softest wool I could afford. The tiny blue sailboats marching along the border. Antonio's initials hidden down in the corner like a held breath. In that bright, glossy room full of things stamped out by machines and factories, my blanket looked, to my eyes, like the only real and living thing in it. Natasha held it up by 2 corners, the way you'd hold something out to check it for a stain. And I watched her face. I watched her register that it was handmade. The slight unevenness that means a human being did this with love, the very thing the magazines now swear makes a thing precious. And I watched her decide what that meant to her. Her nose wrinkled just slightly. The small telltale expression of a woman who was taught that homemade is just a polite word for poor. Oh, she said. Did you make this? I did, sweetheart, I said, and my voice was warm, and I leaned forward to tell her about the seam. There's something special about it, if you just feel along the... But Natasha was already talking right over me, to the room, to the phone. That's so sweet, she said, in the exact voice you used to end a conversation. It's very homemade. And Lola Chantel laughed that little tinkling laugh of hers and said, bless her heart. And I felt the room tilt the way it does, that old familiar feeling of being made small. But I still did not understand what was about to happen. I truly believed the worst of it was already over. The word homemade, the bless her heart. I thought I would just smile through it and point her to the seam in private. I was so wrong about how far this young woman was willing to take it. What happened next happened fast, and I have replayed it in slow motion 10,000 times since. Natasha folded the blanket back over her arm with a kind of finality. She looked around at her perfect gray party, her registry mountain, her watching friends, her recording Johnsina, and I watched her do the math. The social arithmetic of a woman who lives for an audience. A homemade blanket did not fit the picture. It clashed with the brand. And somewhere in her label-measured heart, She decided that the funny, on-brand, content-worthy thing to do was to make a little joke of it. There was a tall steel trash can at the end of the gift table, the nice kind, lined with a crisp white bag for the wrapping paper. Natasha stood up, blanket over her arm and crossed to it. "Okay, so," she said laughing, playing straight to that phone, "I love Grandma, but we have a whole aesthetic for the nursery." And she held the blanket out over the open can like a magician about to drop a silk scarf. "We only use designer things here." And she let go. My blanket. Antonio's sailboats. Antonio's initials. Antonio's $47,000. Antonio's last letter to the grandson he would never meet. Dropped into a trash can, on top of the torn wrapping paper, while a room full of people laughed. Not all of them, but enough. The nervous, follow-the-leader laugh of people who have decided the powerful one in the room is the one being funny. John Cena's phone caught every second of it. Lola Chantel clapped, delighted. And my son. My Ethan. He stood against that wall, went pale as milk, opened his mouth and closed it again. That was the worst second of the entire day. Not the blanket in the bin. My son's mouth closing. Now, if you have ever stood in a room full of people and watched something you made with your own two hands get treated like garbage, your time, your effort, your love tossed aside because it didn't carry the right label, then you already know the exact feeling that was sitting in my chest in that moment. There's a particular kind of silence that follows it. The silence of deciding how much of yourself you are willing to defend in front of people who have already decided you are not worth very much. If that silence is familiar to you, then stay right here with me because this is the exact moment everything turns. I had a choice in that second and I want you to understand it because it is the hinge the whole story swings on. I could have stood up and shouted. I could have said, "You foolish shallow girl, do you have any idea what you just threw away? There is $47,000 sewn into that blanket. There is the last letter your child's grandfather will ever write." I could have made a scene that lived forever. And part of me, the mother bear, the widow, the woman whose ruined hands had ached over every single row of that wool, part of me wanted to badly. But I didn't. Because in that exact second, three things were true all at once. 1. The bonds and the letter were safe, sewn shut inside the lining, and Natasha hadn't found them and wasn't going to. 2. A camera was running, and the cruelty was being recorded by the cruel woman's own friend, which meant the truth would keep without any help from me. And 3, this is the one that decided it. I looked at that smug, performing, frightened young woman, and I understood that the very worst punishment I could possibly give her was not a scene. It was the truth delivered later, when she could no longer pretend she hadn't done it. So I did the only thing in that room that had any dignity left in it. I stood up quietly, I walked to the trash can, and I reached in and took back what was mine. A few scraps of wrapping paper clung to the wool. I brushed them off, calm as you like, the way you brush crumbs off a child's shirt. I folded it neatly, the way 40 years behind a counter teaches your hands to fold a thing without your mind even being asked. And I tucked it down into my bag. The room had gone quiet now. The laugh had curdled in the air. Even Natasha seemed to sense she'd misjudged the wind. She covered it with a bright, "Oh, did you want it back? That's fine, take it, sorry, It's all right, dear," I said, and my voice was perfectly steady. "It's not really your kind of thing. I'll keep it." And I watched that steadiness land on her. And I watched it bother her far more than any anger would have. She had braced for tears or a tantrum, the only two reactions her whole world had ever prepared her for. A calm old woman folding a blanket and saying, "I'll keep it," did not compute. "I think I'll head home," I said to the room gently. "Thank you for having me. Congratulations on the baby." I found Jennifer's eyes, gave her a small nod, picked up my bag with Antonio inside it, and I walked out of that boutique hotel house with my back straight. I didn't cry until I reached my car. And then, with the door shut and that glossy house in my mirror, I let myself fall apart for exactly as long as it took to feel it. I held the blanket against my chest. It still smelled faintly of the trash, banana peel and floral garbage bag plastic, and somehow that was the thing that finally undid me. That Antonio's last gift, his 30 years of patient love, had spent 2 minutes smelling like a garbage can because a young woman thought it would look good on her page. "I'm so sorry, Antonio," I whispered. "I should have just told them." But here is the strange thing about grief and clarity. They can ride in the very same car. By the time my tears finally stopped, Something underneath them had gone very calm and very certain. The way the surface of a pond goes still, and you can suddenly see all the way down to the bottom of it. And what I saw down there was this. I was not going to give Natasha those bonds. Not like this. Not into hands that would call a legacy tacky, if it came without a logo. But the baby little Hudson, who hadn't done a single thing wrong, who was innocent of every bit of it, that baby still deserved his grandfather's gift. That part was never in question for a second. Antonio had saved it for the child, not for the child's mother. So somewhere on that drive home, I quietly began to think like a tailor again. Not about how to make a scene. About how to make this last exactly the way Antonio had asked, in a way that no one could ever throw away again. The phone was already ringing when I walked in my door. But it wasn't Ethan. Not yet. It was Jennifer. Olivia. Her voice was tight. I am so sorry. I am so ashamed of that hole. I should have stood up. I should have said something. You and Ethan both, I said, not unkindly. It's all right, Jennifer. I have it. It's safe. She didn't find the pocket. A pause. She doesn't know about the bonds. The letter. No. She just thinks she threw away a homemade blanket. Jennifer was quiet for a moment. And then she said the thing that lit the fuse on everything, though neither of us knew it yet. Olivia, I have to tell you. After you left, I was so rattled I said something to Ethan. I told him his father would be heartbroken. All those bonds finally going to the baby in that blanket, just like Antonio wanted. Her voice caught. Olivia. The look on his face. I don't think he knew. I think I just told my nephew what was sewn inside the thing he watched his wife throw in the garbage. I closed my eyes. It's all right, Jennifer, I said again, though my heart had begun aching now in a new direction entirely, toward my son. He went white as a sheet, she said. He left right after you did. Didn't say a word to Natasha. Just left. I thanked her and I hung up, and I stood in my kitchen holding that blanket. And I understood that somewhere across town my son was driving home with a piece of information detonating slowly inside him. That he now knew the blanket in the bin had held his dead father's 30-year gift and his last letter. That he had watched it happen, and laughed his nervous laugh and said nothing. I put the kettle on and I waited. Because I knew the way mothers know that Ethan would call. He called 3 minutes later. But before I tell you about that call, I have to ask you something, and I mean it. Be honest with me here, because I have gone back and forth on it for months. Was my son a coward in that moment by the wall? Or was he just a man who genuinely didn't know what he was looking at, doing the small cowardly thing we have all done at one time or another to keep the peace? Tell me which one you think down in the comments. Because I am his mother, and even I cannot decide some nights. Now, when the phone rang, it was Ethan, and his voice was already broken before he said a single word. Mom. Cracked on that one syllable. Mom, please tell me you took the blanket home. Please tell me you have it. I have it, sweetheart, I said. It's right here on my kitchen table. It's safe. I heard him exhale like a man surfacing from deep underwater. A long shaking breath that turned halfway through into something that was not quite a sob. Oh, thank God, he said. Oh, thank God. Jennifer told me. Mom, what was folded inside that blanket? And there it was. The question the whole day had been driving toward. My son in his car in his driveway asking me what his wife had thrown away. I could have softened it. I could have spared him. But Ethan is 32 years old and a father now, and there are some things a man needs to hear in full because the weight of them is the entire point. Your father's savings bonds, Ethan, I said gently. All of them. The ones he bought for his first grandchild, every birthday and bonus for almost 30 years. They came due this year. They're worth just under $47,000. I let that sit. And his letter. The last one. The one he dictated to me in the hospital, for the baby to open on his 18th birthday, so a boy who'll never get to meet his grandfather can sit down someday and hear from him anyway. That's what was folded inside the blanket, sweetheart. That's what your father sewed his whole heart into. And that's what you watched go into the trash. The line went very, very quiet. And then my son, my gentle, peacekeeping, conflict-avoiding son, made a sound I had not heard out of him since he was a small boy. A raw, helpless, breaking sound. I didn't stop her, Mom, he said. I was right there. And I didn't stop her. I let him cry. Sometimes that is the entire job of being a mother. You let them cry and you don't rush it and you don't try to fix it too fast. I kept telling myself it was just a blanket, he said when he could talk again. That's what I told myself in the room. It's just a blanket, don't make a thing of it. And it was Dad, Mom. It was Dad's hole. And he made that little laugh, the broken one. I am going to hear that laugh for the rest of my life. How are you so calm? He asked me. How are you not screaming? I would understand if you never spoke to either of us again. Because I have it, Ethan, I said. Because your father's gift is safe on my table, and that baby is going to get every cent of it and every word of that letter. Nothing precious was actually lost today, except maybe some illusions, and those needed losing. I paused. And because being calm is the only weapon I have ever found that the people who throw things away cannot argue with. He was quiet. Then, what do you want to do? Tell me what you want and I'll do it. For once in my marriage, I'll do the right thing instead of the easy one. And there it was. The very first real spine I had heard in my son's voice in years. It had cost him this much to find it. Maybe it always does. I want one thing, I told him. I want this whole family in one room. Your Aunt Jennifer, Natasha, Lola if she'll come. And I want to give Hudson his grandfather's gift properly, out loud, where everyone can see exactly what it is, and exactly what almost happened to it. I let it land. Your father said, make her open the blanket. So we are going to open that blanket together. Just a little later than he planned. I will not pretend the days between were easy, and I will be honest with you about what Natasha said when Ethan finally told her the truth that night, because the two versions of that conversation, his and hers, tell you everything you will ever need to know about the people who told them. Ethan sat her down, still shaking, and told her there had been $47,000 and his father's last letter sewn into the blanket she'd thrown away on camera. And Natasha's first words, her very first words, were not, "Oh my God," or "Is it gone?" or "What have I done?" Her first words were, "Well, how was I supposed to know? She should have said something. Who sews money into a blanket? That's insane. This is kind of her fault, honestly. This is kind of her fault, honestly." That one sentence is the whole of Natasha, I'm afraid. Caught doing something nearly unforgivable, her instinct was not remorse. It was defense. To find the angle, any angle, where she was the wronged party. She had thrown a dead man's legacy into the trash. And within 30 seconds she had constructed a version of events where the real villain was the grieving widow who failed to label her gift correctly. Not once in any telling I ever heard did Natasha say the words "I'm sorry" and mean them. I want you to hold on to that because it matters a great deal for what I decided to do next. So I made some calls of my own that week, with my reading glasses on and Antonio's cigar box open on the table in front of me. I had spent 40 years being good with my hands and quietly good with money, and now I put both of those things to work. I took the bonds to the bank, and a kind young man helped me confirm exactly what Antonio had told me. $47,000 in change. Every dollar of it earned by a man buying small and waiting long. Then I went to see a woman named Patricia, who handles these matters, and I set up an education trust for Hudson. A real one. Locked. The money would go to the child. His schooling, his start in life, administered independently, where it could not be spent or borrowed against or, honestly, kind of her fault, by anyone at all. Not Natasha. Not Ethan. Not even me. The child's, and only the child's, exactly the way Antonio intended it. I will tell you, it cost me something to lock my own son out of it too. I won't pretend otherwise. But Antonio's wish was for the grandbaby, and the cleanest way to honor a wish is to make it impossible for anyone to bend it later, in a weak moment, for a stroller or a vacation or a designer crib. And then I planned the gathering. A small one at my house, where I have the home court advantage of a kitchen that smells like 40 years of good meals. Because some weapons are kindness and I intended to use every one I had. The baby came right in the middle of all of it. Hudson arrived on a rainy Thursday, 7 pounds and furious about all of it, with, and I am not making this up, his grandfather's exact frown stamped right onto his tiny red face. The first time they laid him in my arms, that cross little face working itself up to a holler, I saw Antonio so clearly I had to sit down in the chair. "There you are," I whispered to him. "We've been saving up for you a long, long time, little man. For a few days, the baby softened everyone, even Natasha, exhausted and human in the way new mothers are. The labels temporarily forgotten under spit up and no sleep. And for a few days I let myself hope the gathering might not even be necessary, that this baby might just melt the whole thing away. But then I saw Natasha's very first posted photograph of Hudson, staged, filtered in a $400 outfit, captioned with brand names, and I understood that the softness was only a phase. The values were the structure underneath it. That baby was already being measured for the same little tags his mother had been raised inside. Which meant Antonio's gift and Antonio's letter mattered now more than they ever had. So I sent the invitations. Sunday dinner, my house, everyone. They came on a Sunday evening into a house that smelled like the pot roast I'd spent all afternoon on. Ethan, gray and quiet, carrying the baby. Natasha, polished again, wary. Lola, Chantel, who came because missing it would have looked worse than attending. And Jennifer, who arrived early to help me, and to stand at my shoulder like the sister Antonio would have wanted there. I had set the table nicely, and in the center where the centerpiece would normally go, I had laid the blanket. Washed now, the garbage smell long gone, the sailboats bright, Antonio's initials in the corner, folded with the inner pocket facing up. Natasha's eyes went straight to it the second she walked in, and her whole face did something complicated. She had not expected to ever see it again. I think she had hoped it would simply, quietly disappear, the way uncomfortable things have always disappeared for people used to having their discomfort handled by somebody else. We ate first. I insisted on it. You do not do the hard thing on an empty stomach, and I wanted everyone settled and fed, and entirely unable to claim afterward that they'd been ambushed. We talked about the baby. It was almost pleasant. Natasha even thanked me for the roast and seemed a little surprised to find she meant it. And then I cleared the plates and I sat back down, and I laid my hand flat on the blanket. I'd like to give Hudson his gift from his grandfather now, I said. Properly this time. The way Antonio asked me to before he died. The table went still. Ethan's jaw tightened. Lola set down her wine glass. Natasha went carefully, perfectly blank. Natasha, I said, and my voice was warm and steady and not unkind, which somehow made it worse for her. You held this blanket a few weeks ago, and you decided what it was worth, and you threw it away. I would like to show you and everyone here what you were actually holding in your hands that day. And I picked up the seam ripper, the same little tool I had used 10,000 times across 40 years. And I opened that inner pocket in front of all of them, slow and deliberate, the little blade sliding through the careful stitches I had sewn shut with so much love. And I drew out the contents and laid them on the clean tablecloth, one at a time like a banker counting out a fortune, which is exactly what I was doing. These, I said, setting down the thick, rubber-banded stack, are United States savings bonds. Your father bought them, Ethan. Few at a time. Every birthday and every bonus for almost 30 years, starting the year you turned 10. The envelope in his closet said, "For our first grandbaby." I smoothed the stack flat. They came due this year. They are worth $47,000. The number went around that table like a cold draft under a door. Lola's mouth fell open. Natasha had gone very pale. And this, I said, setting down the envelope gently, the way you'd set down a sleeping child, is the last letter your husband ever wrote, Ethan. He dictated it to me in the hospital. It's for Hudson to open on his 18th birthday, so that a boy who will never meet his grandfather can sit down someday and hear from him anyway. I rested 2 fingers on it. Antonio's exact words to me were, "Make her open the blanket. Make them find it. Make it last." I looked up and I looked directly at Natasha, and I kept my voice as gentle as I have ever kept it. This is what you held in your hands at the shower. $47,000. And the last words of a dying man. This is what you called homemade. This is what you dropped in a trash can on camera, in front of 20 people, because it didn't match your aesthetic. Nobody at that table breathed. And every single one of them knew that John Cena's video was still out there somewhere in the world. Natasha did what Natasha does. She reached straight for the version where she was the victim. "You can't put this on me," she said, her voice climbing. "How was I supposed to know? Who sews $50,000 into a blanket and doesn't tell anyone? That's basically a trap. You set me up." "I didn't let you do anything, Natasha," I said, still calm. Your husband's father asked with his dying breath that the gift be hidden inside something handmade, so that it would be treasured instead of spent. I honored him. I assumed, foolishly, I'll grant you that one, that no one alive would throw a handmade blanket in the garbage. That assumption was my only mistake here. The throwing was entirely yours. It was a joke, she said. It was for the camera. I know, I said gently. That is rather the whole problem, dear. And I folded my hands on the table. You only use designer things. You told the entire room. So you took the one priceless thing you were given that whole day and you put it in the trash because it didn't come with a logo, and because your friend was recording, and because you have been taught your whole life that worth is a thing that gets printed on a little tag. There is no tag on love, Natasha. There is no brand stamped on 30 years of a man saving for a child he knew he might never live to meet. You couldn't see it because no one ever taught you how to look. And it very nearly cost your own son his inheritance and his grandfather's last words. Lola Chantel started to say something. Now that's not really fair. And I turned my eyes to her just once. Lola, I said. You taught her how to look. I would sit this one out. And Lola Chantel sat it out. Then I told them what I had decided, because mercy and consequence can sit at the very same table, and I had raised Ethan to know the difference between them. Here is what happens now, I said. Hudson gets every cent Antonio saved it for that baby, and that baby will have it. I laid my hand on the bonds, but not the way it was meant to be given. I cannot hand an open inheritance to a household that throws legacies in the trash for content. So this money is going into a locked education trust, administered independently, for Hudson and Hudson alone. His schooling. His start. It cannot be spent or borrowed against or touched by his parents. Not by Natasha. Not by you, Ethan. Not by me. Ethan nodded slowly, and I saw with a small ache that he understood, that the locking out included him, and that he did not argue, because he knew he had earned it by that wall on that day. And the blanket, I said, comes home with me tonight. Hudson can have it when I am certain it'll be honored, and not one day before. A thing isn't safe in a house that didn't know it was precious. Natasha opened her mouth to protest. The blanket, I think, which tells you she still had not understood a single word I'd said. And my quiet son finally spoke. Natasha. Just her name. But in a voice I had never once heard him use with her. Don't. Not one more word. Not about the blanket, not about whose fault it was. Not one more word. And Natasha, for the very first time since I had known her, closed her mouth and kept it closed. It had taken $47,000 and a dead man's letter to give my son a backbone. But there it finally was. Better late than never. There was one thing left to do. The most important thing. The thing Antonio actually wanted. His letter to Hudson is sealed until the boy is 18, I said. And it'll wait locked in that trust until then. But your father wrote one part for all of us too. A small opening for the day this family first learned about the gift. He made me promise to read it out loud when that day came. I took a second, smaller envelope from the pocket of my cardigan. He didn't know it would be a day quite like this one. But here we are. I opened it. My hands were shaking, not from the arthritis this time. And I read my husband's words to his family in my own kitchen, with his grandson asleep in his son's arms. If you're hearing this, I read, then the little one has finally arrived, and I'm sorry I couldn't be there to be a nuisance about it. I've been saving for this baby since Ethan was 10 years old, because the best thing my own grandfather ever gave me wasn't money. It was the proof that somebody was already thinking about me before I even existed. That's what's sewn into this blanket. Proof you were wanted, little one, by an old man who never got the chance to meet you. Spend the money on something that lasts. And whatever else you do. And my voice broke here and I let it. Be the kind of family that knows the difference between what a thing costs and what a thing is worth. Your grandmother does. Learn it from her. All my love, Antonio. The room was silent. Jennifer was weeping openly. Ethan had his face pressed down into the top of his sleeping son's head, his shoulders shaking. And Natasha was looking at the blanket on the table, the one she had thrown away, and for the first time I think actually seeing it. I am not going to tell you that what happened next was forgiveness. It wasn't, not that night, and I won't dress it up for you. I folded the letter back into its envelope, And because I am not a cruel woman, I softened, the way you let a room breathe after a hard truth has been told. I didn't do this to humiliate you, Natasha, I said. Though I understand that's how it feels. I did it because that baby is going to grow up in your house learning your values, and someday he is going to need to know there was another way to measure things. The bonds are for his future. The letter is for his heart. And the blanket, I rested my hand on it one last time, is just to remind everyone in this room, myself included, that the most precious thing in any room is almost never the most expensive one. I looked at my son. Ethan, you stayed quiet at that shower because quiet was easier. You've stayed quiet your whole life because it was easier. I am not angry with you. But I need you to hear me as your mother. That blanket survived because I refused to be quiet about what it was worth, even when being quiet would have been so much more comfortable. That is the real inheritance, son. Not the bonds. That. He nodded. He couldn't speak. He didn't need to. Here is how it all shook out in the months after, because I know you want the ledger and not just the feeling. The trust is locked and it is growing. $47,000 sitting quietly, doing for Hudson exactly what Antonio intended, waiting patiently the way Antonio himself would have. The boy can't touch it until he's grown, and neither can anybody else. And that is precisely the point. John Cena's video, the one of Natasha dropping the blanket and saying, "We only use designer things here," turned out to have been seen by far more of this family than Natasha ever realized. She had posted it as a cute little moment, before any of us knew what was inside. She took it down, of course, the day Ethan told her the truth. But the internet keeps what it is given, and enough people had already seen it that Natasha spent a long quiet season being known, in her own circle, as the woman who threw away her child's inheritance for a laugh. I didn't do that to her. She filmed it herself. There's a lesson tucked in there too about living for a camera. Lola Chantel and I are not close. We never will be. But she has stopped saying bless her heart to me, which I count as a diplomatic victory. Natasha and I are careful with one another. She has never fully apologized. She isn't built for it, and I have stopped waiting. But a few weeks after that dinner, she asked me in a very small voice if I would teach her how to knit. And I said yes. We have since made one lopsided, ugly, wonderful little hat for Hudson together. Her first handmade thing. And she kept it. She didn't throw it away. It's a start. I'll let you decide for yourself whether she's earned anything more than that, because some nights I honestly can't tell, and I would rather hear what you think than pretend I have it all figured out. Ethan is the one who changed the most. Grief and shame did to my son what 40 years of comfort never could. They grew him a backbone. He came to me about a month after that dinner alone, and sat at my kitchen table where the blanket had been, and he said, "I've been replaying the shower, Mom, and I keep landing on the same thing. I didn't fail Dad when I let that blanket go in the trash. I failed him 100 times before that. Every single time I stayed quiet to keep Natasha happy. The blanket was just the one I couldn't unsee. You knew that about me for years too," I told him. "Why didn't you ever say something?" "Because some things a person has to find for himself," I said. "I could have told you 1,000 times. It took a blanket in a bin to make you believe it. He's different now. He speaks up. He and Natasha are in counseling, which I never in my life thought I'd see. He still keeps his father's fishing hat on the hook by the door, but now he's told Hudson, who can't understand a word of it yet, that he'll teach the boy to fish himself the way Grandpa would have. "I'm still learning how to not choose easier," he told me. "But I'm choosing it on purpose now. That's new. And I am proud of him for it. Better late than never." The blanket lives on Hudson's crib now. It took a few months, long enough for me to be sure the house it was going into had learned even a little what it was holding. When I finally carried it over, Natasha had cleared a place of honor for it, and she'd put away the designer throw that used to live there, and she didn't say one word about aesthetics. She just watched me lay Antonio's sailboats over her son, and she touched the corner with his initials, and she said very quietly, "M. I never even noticed that was there." "Most people don't," I said. "You have to know to look. My hands are worse this winter. Some mornings the needles win and I can't knit at all. But I'm making Hudson a sweater slowly, a few rows on the good days, with his grandfather's initials hidden in the cuff, where the boy will find them someday, if he knows to look." Because that is what we do, the homemade grandmothers. We sew ourselves quietly into things and then we wait. Antonio taught me that. Time pays interest on patience. If there is one thing I'd hand you out of all of this, it's this. The world is going to tell you louder every single year that worth is a thing you can read right off a label. That the expensive gift is the real one, and the homemade one is sweet but lesser. Don't you believe it? The most valuable things in any room are almost always the quiet ones, the ones made by hand, given without a logo, and so terribly easy to throw away, if no one ever taught you how to look. So learn how to look. And whatever it is that you love, sew it into something that lasts. And never, ever let anyone tell you it belongs in the trash. That's my story. One homemade blanket, one trash can, and a love worth more than the whole designer room put together. If this reminded you of a handmade gift you still have, the one money could never buy, tell me about it down in the comments. I read every single one. And if it moved you, hit subscribe because next time I'll have another one for you. I'll see you then.